Hello my friends, this is Post-Production Pi with SLRLounge.com and welcome to another Lightroom 4 weekly edit featuring the SLR Lounge Lightroom 4 preset system. Now, like always, we're going to go through the settings and go through our edit first using the preset system, and then we'll show you guys exactly what the individual sliders are doing so those of you that don't have the preset system can benefit as well. So let's get started, guys. Let's go over first the actual settings for this image. Now this was shot at 1/8000th of a second, f2.8, ISO 100, and what we've done here is we've underexposed, and I think we've underexposed a little bit too much for this shot. But basically the goal, and this will still work for what we're trying to do, is we keep the ISO at 100, we expose so that we basically haven't blown out any of our highlights while we haven't also clipped any of our blacks. Now if we'd exposed it so basically our blacks were down here, so our shadows were kind of too far clipped, then we'd gone too far and we've lost too much detail in the black to be able to recover. So that's really important when you're trying to basically encompass the entire tonal range in a single shot to make sure that you haven't clipped the blacks and also blown the highlights. All right, so we have all the detail that we need for this shot. What we want to do is just lift it out. Now this was shot on a 7200mm lens at 2.8 at 70mm, and we shoot sometimes at 70mm and back up so we can compress the background and pull kind of the mountains in closer to the subject. But if there's one thing I could change with this image, it'd probably be to shoot at a little bit higher aperture. Reason being is that I think it'd be nice to just be able to see a little more mountain and cloud detail. The shallow depth of field is nice, but I don't think it's really doing that much in this shot anyway. So that's one thing I would change there. You know, hindsight's always 20/20. Let's get started, guys. And first thing I would always do is start with a preset that's closest to where we want to go. Now we want to basically do a dynamic range boost, and so I'm going to choose the 25 HDR strong to start out with. Now one thing I might do in version 1.3 is we might add a soft portrait version of this preset for portraits like this as well, because there are going to be some modifications that we need to make. And of course, guys, if you have suggestions for the Lightroom 4 preset system, if you guys are users, make them known. You guys can post in the forums, shoot us an email. Either way, we're going to try and incorporate these things so we can make the preset system even better. And as always, these minor updates are free for existing users. All right, so let's keep going. What we're going to do is go into our base adjustments. I'm going to pull up my exposure by, let's see, 1.5 stops. That's a good guess. All right, and then I'm going to go down to my detail, and I'm going to do a light soften for skin tones. Now this is also going to reset contrast, which is great because I want to modify that actually, you know, as we go. I don't want it to be too high. So what we're going to do is click to a medium boost in contrast first, and that's actually exactly kind of where I want it. I don't want it to be too high because it's just going to look a little bit too crunchy. All right, so medium boost in contrast is great. Our black levels are nice. We have a nice bright image. It looks good. Let's go down. I don't think there's anything else that I'm really wanting to worry about over here in our base adjustments. So let's shrink up the base adjustments, and now let's make some modifications using our brushes. But before we do that, I do want to go over what we've done here. So let's go over to the right side panel, guys, and we've adjusted the exposure up to 1.5, contrast to +50. We've done our standard dynamic range boosting setting by pulling highlights and whites down, shadows and blacks up. And then we've also, that additional contrast was added so we don't have too flat of an image as you'd see right here. All right, we've pulled clarity down to -10 because this is a portrait and we don't want it to be crunchy. We want nice skin tones. We want it to look nice and pretty. All right, go down to tone curve, and we have a contrast boosting tone curve. No modification in the overall tones or color tones, just the actual contrast boost. So we're pulling the shadows down a bit, boosting highlights a bit just to give us a little more contrast. Next thing on detail, we have our standard sharpening setting applied, and notice that we have some noise reduction. Why? Because we're doing a heavy boost in dynamic range and detail, which means that we're pulling up our shadows. That's adding noise, and so we've added a compensating factor of 20 luminance noise reduction to help correct for that. All right, lens vignetting is standard 30-30 for our mount and midpoint, and everything else is basically just the same. Now from here, we're going to be using our brush settings, and check this out too, guys. From our original image, if we look at the histogram, you can see how basically we've pulled up the highlights so that they're not blown, but we have all the highlight detail, and we've also raised the shadows. So now we have everything encompassed within this kind of middle of the range right here, and we have all of our detail. All right, so at this point, we're going to be using adjustment brushes and everything. So if you guys don't have the preset system, just pause it, dial in the settings as appropriate. First thing I'm going to do, guys, is grab my detail enhancer. And I say guys way too much. There's things I say way too much. I'm going to go to sky, cloud, ocean, because we're dealing with the sky here. And we're just going to paint this in over the sky. I'm not going to worry too much about it being painted in perfectly because I'm going to actually do a little bit of modification to it. But let's paint it in first. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust up. I'm holding Alt right now, or Option on a Mac. I'm adjusting the size up so we have a very, very large feather. And we're just going to basically feather out of this edge right here. So it has a very subtle graduation between where the effect is starting and where it's stopping, basically. And I don't want these, you can see how these bushes over on the right side are getting darker up towards the top. That's because of the clarity that this preset is adding. We want to make sure that we're not doing that over areas like this, because it's going to look almost essentially like you either boosted too much clarity in that area, or like you used a filter that's like a graduated ND filter that's pulling down the detail, over that area. We're going to pull down the exposure just a bit more so I can retain just a little bit more blue in my clouds. We want to be careful not to go too much. And what I might do is just go down quite a bit, and then we'll pull up. So that way we can kind of notice it a little bit more. All right, so that's too far. So let's take it up to maybe 0.4. You can see how Lightroom 4 is still having issues. It is irritating. All right, that looks pretty solid right there. Let's click on a new brush. So I'm just going to click new. And be sure to do that, because if you don't click new and then you click just on a different preset, it's just going to adjust the current one that you have selected. Let's go to nature and color, and let's boost kind of that color and nature in that foreground area. So again, what this is going to do is just really kind of boost the overall tones and color. And it's designed to boost nature tones. So nature tones are essentially like the browns and greens and stuff like that. And so it's going to kind of enhance those slightly more than other color tones. All right, let's subtract that out again. I'm holding Alt, Option on a Mac. I want to make sure I'm not covering any skin tones. And also make sure we're not covering kind of the mountains and stuff. That looks great right there. Let's do one last thing. Now that we are working with that HDR preset, we have to be very careful with skin tones. So check this out. I'm going to zoom in their skin, and we can see a little bit of skin funk going on. All right, we can see a little bit of like this yellow green stuff appearing over the skin, over the ear, and on this shadow side, we just see all these kind of nasty skin tones over here. We want to fix that. So what we're going to do, guys, is we're going to grab our brushes again. We're going to go down. We have an unenhanced HDR skin, and we're just going to paint that in right over the skin. And you're going to see magically, it's basically going to magically, deliciously paint out that kind of nasty tones, the color tones and stuff like that. So it's removing essentially the HDR effect. So kind of what this preset is doing is basically just reversing everything that HDR preset applied. And so now we get natural skin tones. Like magic. Like Lucky Charms magic. That was my favorite cereal. I should say dessert, because that really doesn't qualify as like breakfast. But I love Lucky Charms, except sometimes the marshmallows kind of have a weird texture to them. All right, let's paint this out. I'm excited. When my kid gets old enough, I'm going to eat Lucky Charms with him. All right, let's paint out over here, right on this top shoulder right there. I'm just being careful not to go over basically too much of the background. I want to make sure that this looks very subtle, and we'll be able to tell when we zoom out, basically. Same thing with his skin. She saved us a little bit of work by wearing gloves. We don't have to worry about her hand. Thank you very much there. That was, of course, unintentional. Well, she just wanted to have gloves on. This reminds me, this was a wedding that we shot quite a while back, and this was one of the coolest couples that I've worked with. They're so much fun. And as you can tell, they're just a California fun-loving couple. He loves to surf. She loves to hang out at the beach. All right. This is looking pretty solid right now. And then I'm going to just go and check out his hand over here. His hand doesn't really need much. It's not really, getting a lot of attention out here anyway. So it's not like we need to make this adjustment, but I'm going to do it anyway. And you know what? Let's actually undo it, because I think it looks a little bit more natural, because it's not going to change color, shift color from this area to this area. So let's leave it there, because it's not really distracting or anything like that. I'm just going to leave it. I just Control-Z'd it, or Command-Z on Mac. All right, so this is looking pretty solid right here, guys. I'd say I'm pretty happy with where we're at. Let's check out the before and the after once my computer stops freaking out. I'm on a crazy powerful laptop, guys. This thing's got dual SSDs, 16 gigs of RAM, like a video card that can handle anything, and the latest i7 processor, and I'm having issues. So I can't imagine all you poor people. I don't know what you guys are working on, or if you're having the same issues as me, but this is no good. All right, so let's hit backslash. So here is the before version of the image. Here is the after version of the image. You can see how much tonal range we have retained. We've kept, again, We want some highlights in the sky, guys. We want those clouds to have some pure whites in them. We want some shadows in the image. We want all that because it's adding contrast. It's making it look natural. Were we to basically keep this all dark and just kind of make it, you know, super HDR-y, it's just not going to be like it's going to have that classic HDR look that you see on the internet, where basically people post these ridiculous images that look all crazy HDR-ified. We want natural, guys. We want high dynamic range. We want natural looking images, and that's kind of our style. If you guys dig that crazyified HDR style, then that's cool, more power to you, but what we're going for is that really natural look. All right, so great job. We'll see you all in the next Lightroom 4 edit.